Assassins, to another episode of the Dark Assassins podcast, the show that dives deep into not just technology, but the concepts, software, and procedures behind it all, and explains it so simply that even your grandma can understand it. As always, I'm your host, the Dark Assassin. So, like we were alluding to last week, this week, of course, was WWDC, Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference, and we got a lot to talk about in this week's episode, recapping the whole thing in case you didn't see it, or if you did, just kind of hearing my thoughts on it. Now, before you go ahead and shoot the messenger being, of course, me, we're going to be talking about cars in this episode, which I know we've kind of done before, and I know this is not a car podcast, but it's not my fault that Apple decided to put multiple very notable car scenes inside of their keynote, and I'm just here reacting to it. Now, I guess that is assuming, of course, that I'm not secretly in Tim's ear and being like, hey man, I want to talk about cars on my podcast a little more, so can you find a way to work in some cars to WWDC in the keynote this year? And then, of course, since me and Tim are so tight, best buds, if you will, he'll just be like, yeah, of course, Dark Assassin, we can absolutely do that. I got you. So with that out of the way, I think we have to address the elephant in the room, which that is that intro scene with Craig Federighi being the absolute legend that he is, because he has once again done it again. So first off, we do have to address that Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, you guys need to sit down and step aside because the real F1 king has just arrived and he's about to whoop your butts. Because as we saw in the opening keynote, he showed a tremendous amount of speed and skill handling an F1 car. And with Tim Cook as his crew chief, I mean, I'm not sure you could have asked for a better power duo. And they are absolutely going to run away with the F1 championship, if you ask me. Now, one of the best lines that was probably said in that intro scene was Craig's like, I'm in the lead. And then Tim comes over the radio and is like, you're the only one out there, Craig. Which I thought was absolutely hilarious. And then to turn things up a notch in the way that only Craig Federighi, a.k.a. Air Force One, can do, is he's like, yeah, I'm so glad we have CarPlay in this thing. And then he turns it on and just starts blasting Round and Round by Rat, which is absolutely incredible. And then, of course, while he's doing this, he's just lapping around the top of the Apple spaceship or donut or whatever you want to call it, their headquarters in Cupertino, just doing laps around it. And then he is absolutely moving around that. And to top it all off, at the very end, when he pulls the car into the pits, gets out of the car, takes his helmet off, takes off the balaclava, the thing that you put under the helmet, and shows off his perfectly kept hair. Oh my goodness. This hair had even more volume than normal. I think I could tell it was a little, there might have been a little computer assists there with the volume and mass, because it looked like straight up Elvis hair with how high and swept back it was. It was honestly very, very, very impressive, and without a doubt had many people swooning just seeing Craig in his element like that. Now, I guess this also has to ask the question, aside from it being absolute cinema, by the way, was it better than last year's? And that is a really tough call, because last year, I'm not sure how you can really top that. They're in a plane, they jump out of the plane to some Motley Crue Kickstart My Heart, and Craig Federighi puts on a helmet that is literally in the shape of his hair. I mean, I'm not sure how it gets much more epic than that, yet they kind of, at least, if they didn't top it, they got pretty darn close to being right alongside it. So Not sure how I would rate it, but they were definitely pulling at my heartstrings a little bit with the whole racing vibe this year, which I didn't realize this initially when I first sat down to watch the keynote. But apparently, the whole F1 stunt that they were doing was in promotion for the F1 movie, which apparently I didn't know this. I knew the F1 movie was coming out, and I do have plans to see it. But I didn't realize that it was apparently an Apple original. So I didn't know that. Maybe you already did. But that like really explains, the whole F1 stunt. But anyway, we of course had to break that down because it was so epic and it was absolutely fantastic. But because we're pretty much going to be throwing out our normal podcast schedule to the wind because we're going to be covering WWDC this week, while we're not going to have a trivia question in the sense, I'm going to do you one better, or in this case, four better. And this is going to be a little game of were you paying attention? And it's specific to this intro scene here. So there's four questions just to see if you were paying attention. So the first one is in the opening scene, as we were alluding to. Craig mentions he needed to save his what? What did he need to save? That is question number one. Question number two is what was the number on Craig's F1 car? The third question, in a similar vein, what was the brand of F1 car that Craig was driving? And then number four, according to Tim Cook, what turn was Craig losing time on? So those are your four questions to see if you were paying attention. But with that out of the way, let's actually get into the software features of WWDC rather than just the fun antics of WWDC. So, one thing we have to keep in mind is over the past few years, Apple has made a serious effort to unify their operating systems. And what I mean by this is during their keynotes, they'll mention, yeah, like the Messages app is a prime example. The Messages app is used across every single Apple device essentially. At least all like the personal ones like iPads, iPhones, Macs, all that good stuff. So while they talk about the messages features in the iPhone section, those features also come to the Mac and the iPad and whatnot. So while we are going to be talking about specific features in specific segments, for by and large, they basically apply to all the platforms. It's just the one app in particular that we're talking about. So just kind of as a reminder there. So they start off the keynote, of course, after that F1 stunt, talking about Apple Intelligence, which I kind of saw as a pretty bold move because they started touting how impressive Apple Intelligence was and all of the features that they shipped. But they kind of conveniently left out the whole like context awareness thing, which was like the whole major selling point of last year's WWDC. But to their credit, they did kind of play it off like after they talked about all the great features that they shipped, basically saying that they continue to work on, features to make Siri more personal, which is essentially that same contextual awareness feature that they were talking about last year. But that work needed more time to bake, essentially, to meet their high standards. Now, in my opinion, that is some very nice corporate speak to basically sugarcoat all of the alleged turmoil, drama, and the firestorm that has been going on behind the scenes. Because if you've been listening to any of kind of like the rumor mills about what's going on in Apple land, the whole like AI debacle has been basically just that, a debacle. And there's been a lot of infighting and a bunch of disagreements going on about what direction to take. And it's apparently been pretty bad. But of course, this is all alleged because I don't work for Apple. The people that have been reporting it don't work for Apple. They're getting their sources allegedly from people inside Apple. So of course, you have to take everything with a pinch of salt. But yeah, so assuming those rumors were true, the fact that they basically said that it needs more time to meet their high standards is quite the corporate spin, if you ask me. But with that said, I do have to give them credit for some of the Apple Intelligence features that they have shipped, because while I don't use many of them, the writing tools feature has been absolutely incredible, and it saves me from looking like a fifth grader every time I try to write something because my grammar is notoriously horrible. And if I don't want to look like a fifth grader, I basically have to spend like 5-10 minutes like proofreading a singular paragraph like 5-10 times, and even then, I still don't get everything right. So the writing tools has been a fantastic, and it's basically been my main use of Apple Intelligence since it's dropped. But the other thing that they did announce during this kind of AI spiel is any app now will be able to tap into Apple's Apple Intelligence through the Foundations Model 8 framework that they're bringing with this WWDC. So basically, what that allows you to do is allows you to use Apple's on-device models, so you don't have to worry about API requests to, say, OpenAI or whoever you're using for your AI API requests. So being able to do everything on device is huge, not only for cost saving, you don't have to worry about those API charges, but also because everything's done on device, it's a lot more privacy focused. Nothing leaves the device. You don't have to worry about the AI company that you're sending your requests to harvesting your data. So that is a definitely a huge plus. The biggest thing I see this potentially generating is, depending on how good the models are, this could either be really good news for Apple, or and maybe really bad news for like AI companies like OpenAI, because assuming these models are really good and developers migrate to them, it's going to be a big hit, I think, for companies like OpenAI. But again, it depends on one, how good the results are, but two, if the results are really good and developers make the change. I mean, for the developers, it's going to be a huge cost savings, right? Because they don't have to worry about budgeting in all the tokens that they're going to rack up in API bills for all these requests that they're sending. Everything's going to be done on device, so depending on, I guess, what your tiering is in the company you're going through for, you potentially could also get rate limited potentially. But of course, you don't really have to worry about that if everything's being done locally on the device. So there are definitely a bunch of potential big benefits to Apple opening up their Apple Intelligence feature set to developers through the Foundations model framework. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how many developers take advantage of this, and what it does to like the landscape as a whole, and if companies like OpenAI start to see a hit to their revenue streams. So that was what they opened up with, and then kind of one of the big unveils that I've seen already a lot of talk about online is the whole redesign. Now, was something that was in the rumor mill, and it was supposed to be the biggest redesign since iOS 7. So for clarity and for completeness, I guess the rumors were indeed true. Um, Although I don't think, at least in my opinion, the leap in terms of design was as big from iOS 6 to iOS 7, because that leap was completely different. All the apps looked completely different. So I guess to back up a bit, Apple announced their new redesign, and it's coming across all platforms. So Mac OS is getting it, iPad OS is getting it, the iPhone is getting it, iOS is getting it, basically everything. It's coming across everything. And they're calling it liquid glass. And it has a sort of lensing effect. And I guess for the nerds out there, kind of like a ray tracing type thing to blend and refract the background of whatever is on your screen, like in this kind of clear slash transparent bubble like interface. Um, and it like shrinks the menus and everything, so like your menus are a little more compact. They don't like necessarily take up like the whole bottom bar of your screen, so I guess you're kind of getting some real estate back. At least in some of like the early demos and betas, it seems like depending on what your background is, it can be kind of hard to read text in the liquid glass. So I'm sure they're gonna, over the course of the betas, they're gonna kind of iron it out, maybe allow you to kind of customize a little bit to kind of maybe either darken the kind of glass effect or maybe even remove it entirely, or somehow be able to manage and tweak it so it's not necessarily making text hard to read depending on the background. Um, but my overall take, of course, I haven't touched liquid glass at all because I haven't gotten any of the betas. But my at least interpretation from seeing the demo during WWDC and watching some reviews on it, it it gives me Windows 11 vibes. And I don't mean that in the bad sense that like, oh, it's terrible like Windows is. But I mean in the sense that Windows 11 is literally just Windows 10 with a slight reskin. Like if you look hard enough, you can be like, yeah, that's literally just Windows 10 with a slightly different like skin on top of it. Because of course, if you know anything about Windows 11, you go like one menu deep into a sub menu and it's Windows 10 all over again. Now that's not the same thing in the app in Liquid Glass, of course, but just the kind of general vibe that it looks basically the same but like slightly different. I guess you could also kind of relate it back to like Windows Vista and Windows 7, because Windows Vista had was kind of like the intro to that kind of design language, and then Windows 7 just kind of refined it and made it look a little bit different, but it was still very kind of similar. So that was kind of my overall vibe of it. Like it's definitely a redesign, but it's not this like massive overhaul. The icons look completely different and all that stuff. Because if you'll remember from Windows, or not Windows, iOS 6 to iOS 7, if you remember like the Photos app, for instance, the Photos app was literally like a picture of a sunflower back, Windows, or gosh, there I go again, Windows, iOS 6 and previously. But then, of course, ever since then, it's been that kind of weird, like, it kind of looks like a flower, but it's like that petal flat thing. I don't even know how to describe it. But, obviously completely different. So it's not that kind of a redesign. It's not completely different, but visually it does look, I guess, a little bit different. So, yeah, I don't know. To me, I think I, of course, like I said, I haven't tried it yet, but it kind of seems a little overhyped and not really the radical change that at least what I took away from the rumors anyway. It was supposed to be this radical change that was basically going to be iOS 7 all over again, and that really wasn't my interpretation at all. But I guess we'll see what happens when it fully ships. And we've talked about the betas a couple of times here already. Uh, I'll just come out and say it. I do not recommend any of you trying out the betas, at least on your main daily device. Now, if you have a secondary laptop or you have a secondary iPhone or something like that, and you want to test the betas out on, sure, go ahead, knock yourself out, but definitely don't test it on your main device that you rely on, because it's called a beta for a reason. It's not production ready. There are going to be bugs. People have already found plenty of them. Plus, it's only in developer beta right now, so you have to have like an Apple developer account in order to get access to the betas. I think the public beta is probably supposed to come. I think they typically come around like July-ish, I think is around when they come, so maybe like a month or so from now. But yeah, so if you want to test out the betas, you're more than welcome to, but please don't use it on your main device that you rely on every day, because you'll probably have some bugs that you probably don't necessarily want to deal with. So getting into the specific versions, so the 26 rumor that was going around that all the operating system versions were just going to shift to be 26 and kind of reflect the year were in fact true. So all of these are 26. So iOS 26, Vision OS 26, Mac OS 26, etc. So iOS, one of the kind of big features that they talked about was lock screen improvements. So with the whole like liquid glass thing, like the time and whatnot can actually scale depending on what your wallpaper is and how many notifications you have. So it can kind of dynamically scale and adjust to that. They also added like a 3D kind of spatial photo aspect, kind of like what the Vision Pro had, but they're bringing that to the iPhone in both the Photos app and on wallpapers. They updated the camera, so um, it's an interesting update because it basically removes all of the features, at least from first glance. So if you open up or the camera app right now, you have a bunch of different like options you can select, and like there's a bunch of like different icons and toggles and things. But in the redesign, it's basically just video, photo, and then if you want to do anything else, you have to like do like some more hoops to jump through, which on the one hand, like they do like actually embed like what kind of frame rate and like resolution you want to record, which people have been asking about for a while. But I think overall this is a good change because from the folks that aren't as technically savvy, just having the option of, okay, do I want to take a picture or do I want to take a video, and just selecting which one and just going is definitely going to be very nice for those folks. So I guess depending on how you look at it, this could be a nice change or one that you don't really like. The phone app gets a an update. It basically it kind of reconfigured the layout a little bit, so now it kind of looks more like the Messages app, where you can like pin favorites and view recents with like voicemails and whatnot. Now, of course, I'm assuming that kind of relies on the fact that you have an Apple Intelligence supported device, because from at least from the keynote, it looked like the voice messages was basically like the summary thing that Apple Intelligence is able to do. But probably the coolest feature coming to the phone is what they called. Well, there were two big features. One was call screening, which was basically, I'm pretty sure Google's had this for a while now. But essentially, what it is if some unknown number calls you, I guess the phone will basically answer it and basically tell the caller to identify themselves and why they're calling. So during this process, your phone won't ring. And then once they actually identify themselves and say, who they are and why they're calling, then your phone will ring, and then you'll kind of look down and see the notification that, what they introduce themselves as, like, hey, I'm so and so calling about such and such, assuming they actually identified themselves. So that's a pretty cool feature. The next one was called Hold Assist, which basically allows you to stay in the hold queue without actually having to worry about kind of listening to the hold music. So basically, the iPhone will basically identify, when you're listening to hold music, and then it'll basically hang up the phone for you. You can opt to hang up the phone essentially, and then when you're, back, actually talking to a representative, it'll essentially call you back so you can hop right in. So you don't just have to kind of sit around waiting and listening to the hold music for potentially minutes or even longer on end. So that was definitely a pretty cool feature. Moving on to messages, you can now put backgrounds in your text messages, and you can also both. It works both in groups and individual messages, and you can also now get typing indicators for group messages as well. Now, this was something, of course, that you could see in individual messages. So if you're just texting with one person and they were typing, you could see like the little three bubble thing going on. But that didn't work in group chats. But now you'll actually get that kind of typing indicator, and also like I guess the icon or the cover photo or whatever for the person that's typing. So that's a pretty cool feature. They also created polls in the Messages app for like group messages, which is pretty nice. If you want to ask something, you don't have to see the flood of responses of people giving their input. You can just kind of throw a poll in there, so that will probably be a pretty nice feature for, especially with larger groups, and trying to decide, what you want to do or where you want to go eat, or something like that. And they also, in the whole kind of like spam type thing that they did with phones, or the phone calls, they're bringing that to messages too. So now they're doing an on-device spam detection thing for unknown numbers. Now this is definitely going to be an Apple Intelligence thing, I'm pretty sure. But essentially, it uses like on-device like detections to basically detect potential spam and like filter out unknown messages. And now, to an extent, this has already existed, but I think my understanding from the keynote is they're going to kind of make it a little more robust than what is previously, since right now it's pretty much that you have two like sections for your messages. You have the known senders and unknown senders. But even unknown senders will still like ping you with a notification. So that, but it seems like now they're going to do more detecting in that in order to basically filter out some potential spam. And then of course you can also say like, hey, this isn't actually spam, and it'll move it to the appropriate spot. Another cool feature, which again is strictly only for Apple Intelligence devices, is live translation. So this basically will be able to translate conversations on the fly using the on-device models. So this works across things like FaceTime, phone calls. It even works through like text messages and all that good stuff for like on-device, on-the-fly translation. The one thing that was really cool that they mentioned is both phones don't have to be iPhones in order for this to work. So if you have an iPhone that has Apple Intelligence on it, it'll work for both you and the person you're calling. Or if you don't have an iPhone with Apple Intelligence and your friend you're calling does, you can still kind of get that translation going on. So that was something that was pretty cool. It also applies to lyrics as well as lyric pronunciation in the music app if you use Apple Music. And then Maps got a little bit of an update too. So Maps is now able to learn your preferred routes. So if you say always take this certain route to work, it'll be able to identify that. And if you use the Maps widget on your iPhone, you can basically get an estimate of how long it'll take you to get to work without actually having to, plug it in. And if for any case there's like an incident, on your normal route, say there's an accident or something, it'll basically send you a notification being like, hey, traffic's a little heavier than normal. We're looking for potential ways to reroute you, that kind of a thing. So definitely a pretty cool feature. But the biggest one that I was missing was the ability to save and export routes. Now, Google has had this for a while with Google Maps. So basically, what you can do is you can plot out a route with a bunch of different stops, and you can basically save that and send it to someone. Be like, hey, here's the route I've been kind of looking at, and you can kind of share it around. And you can do that sort of in Apple Maps now, where you can plan out a route and select multiple stops, along the route for a trip, but you can't really like save or export that in or share it in any meaningful way. If you want to keep it saved, you pretty much just have to keep that in your recents, but you can't like save it, so you just have to be able to identify it. It's kind of a hassle. Ask me how I know. So I was kind of hoping that maybe they would bring something like that to the Maps update, but alas, they did not, because that would make road tripping and planning for road trips a heck of a lot easier. But maybe iOS 27, they'll bring it. Who knows? Next, moving into the Games app. So I think we kind of touched on this and, one of the kind of like what to expect things. But essentially, it's basically a one-stop shop to basically manage all the games that you've installed on your phone. And you can, view things like high scores, see what your friends are playing, all that kind of fun stuff. And basically seamlessly integrates with Apple Arcade. Not, a ton going on there, but, I guess it was worth a mention. Visual intelligence gets an upgrade. So if you guys remember or have heard Circle to Search on Google, on Android phones, that's basically coming to the iPhone now. It's a little bit different. It's in true Apple fashion, they're basically doing their own spin on it. So it's not just like you see something on your screen, you circle it, and it'll search it for you. But you can also you can do that, but you can also do other things like extract events from pictures and whatnot. So if you're like scrolling on social media and you see, like one of those like pictures that someone will post about like an upcoming event for like a concert or something like that, you can use this visual intelligence in order to basically create a calendar invite for yourself. So pretty cool, assuming of course you have an Apple Intelligence iPhone. If you don't, of course you get none of those features. Now, as far as support goes, any iPhone SE 2 or later is supported, and all iPhones, including the iPhone 11 and later, are supported. So a vast variety of iPhones are supported, but again, a lot of these features are going to be Apple Intelligence dependent. So if you don't have that, you're probably not going to see all of these features. Um, Within the iPhone talk that they gave, they also talked about CarPlay, but I kind of moved CarPlay out into its own thing just because I thought that would kind of break up the flow a little bit. But CarPlay, of course, is something iPhone related, so it makes sense that they would kind of throw it in there. But so moving on to CarPlay. So first off, we have to give a huge shout out to Apple for how they started the segment, because they had a very nice Mustang as part of their demo slash prop car that they were using for the demo of CarPlay. Now, my only gripe about it, which is a nitpick, I get that, is the color was very boring. It was just a silver color. Like, I mean, I get it. That's kind of Apple's aesthetic. Not necessarily super duper colorful these days. With like their generic branding. Now, of course, they have their offshoots like the iMac. They have some pretty colors in there and whatnot. But for the most part, it's, kind of typical, like, standard kind of boring colors. So from that aspect, I kind of get why they did it. But kind of a little bit of letdown. Would have been kind of cool if they had a more fancy or a little nicer of a color. Now, the gearheads are going to also be very disappointed because it was not it was not the GT V8 Mustang. It was the EcoBoost 4-cylinder turbo. So the gearheads out there are going to probably whine and complain that that's not a real Mustang. But I think all Mustang and gearhead enthusiasts can all agree that it is definitely more of a Mustang than that abomination that Ford calls the Mach-E, which I'm not even going to say the full name of it because it's just that much of an abomination. But we're getting way off topic. Back to CarPlay. So one of the nice features that they brought up there was the fact that now if you get a phone call, it won't take up the entire screen, which is very nice, especially if you're trying to use maps for navigation. Now, I get that's kind of not necessarily a huge deal, because if you're driving and you get a phone call and it takes up the whole screen, it'll be very easy for you to see who is calling you and if you actually want to answer it or not. So you could easily just kind of like hang up quickly if it was like a spam call or whatever. But regardless, the fact that it doesn't take up the whole screen and you can still see like your maps if you're navigating is very nice. CarPlay also now gets live activities and widgets now too, if you have any, I guess, interest in using either of those. And also, as kind of a fun tidbit during this segment when they were, demoing CarPlay, Craig's F1 car that he parked outside as he was walking in to start the keynote, it got a ticket. So that was kind of unfortunate. And I think if we kind of as we'll get into in a little bit later, I think his car, the F1 car, might have actually gotten towed, actually. Now, that the whole towing thing is just pure speculation on my part, as we'll kind of see in a little bit. But yeah, very, very sad. They didn't like specifically show it getting towed on camera, but it actually, it might have at least got a ticket, which, I mean, regardless, is still a huge bummer. But then it kind of goes downhill a little bit from here, because then they demo CarPlay Ultra, which is the whole like next gen CarPlay thing that they talked about like 2 or 3 WWDCs ago, I think. Now, in fairness, the actual CarPlay Ultra does look pretty cool. And the fact that you can, make it kind of customizable based on, the automaker, and it looks visually, it looks nice. But my gripe was the car they chose. And yes, we're talking about the car again, because unfortunately, while yes, they used an Aston Martin for the car, it was an SUV Aston Martin, which, you know, my whole thing about this is, if you're gonna buy a high-end sports car brand, if you're gonna buy from a high-end sports car brand or even like a supercar brand, Why are you getting an SUV? I mean, I get to each their own, buy what you want, I don't care. But to me, it's like if you're going to, say, a Michelin starred Italian restaurant and you're like, you know what? I'm going to get a hamburger. Like, why? What are you doing? Like, I'm sure that hamburger is going to be pretty darn good, but you're missing the entire point here. Like, if you're going to a Michelin star Italian restaurant, get some Italian food. If you're going to buy, from a high-end sports car or supercar brand, get an actual sports car or supercar. Like, okay, we're gonna stop here before I just take over the entire podcast. But I do appreciate you, Tim, for showing some cars so I could at least talk about it a little bit. But back to the actual WWDC, Watch OS. So the big kind of main feature that they talked about here was something they called Workout Buddy, which of course requires Apple Intelligence in order to work on your iPhone. But basically, it gives you kind of motivation based on your fitness and workout history, and gives you kind of some tailored insights, encouragement along your workout, depending on what you're doing with an AI generative voice. Now, when they did the demo, I mean, it looked kind of cool. I mean, all the demos from what I remember that they gave were like all running based. And it was like, oh yeah, you just like hit your fastest mile yet or whatever. So I mean, I guess if in that sense it might be interesting. It would be I would have liked, I guess, to see how it would have worked in other contexts as well, like other types of workouts rather than just running, like maybe something more like weight training based, rather than like specifically cardio based. Because of course, it's really, which maybe that's why they did a cardio based one, since that's a lot easier to track in a workout, like, what your heart rate is, how fast you're completing your miles and that kind of a thing. So in that sense, it's a lot easier to kind of demo that. But it would have been kind of cool to see it demoed in other contexts as well. Um, the workout app got a new layout, and you can also now it'll like dynamically adjust the volume for incoming calls and notifications based on the sound around you in your environment. So if you're in a very quiet environment, your watch isn't going to ding insanely loud, and then in contrast, if you are in a loud environment, it'll ding louder in order for you to actually hear it. The other thing that they mentioned was like a new wrist flick gesture to essentially silence calls and other notifications, and also clear the smart stack if you have that up. The Apple Watch now gets the Notes app. Not sure what kind of notes you're going to be taking on your Apple Watch, but you have that as an option now. As far as the supported models, the Apple Watch SE2 or later, and any Apple Watch, including the Apple Watch 6 and later, are supported. And then, of course, every Apple Watch Ultra is also supported. So, moving on to tvOS. If I'm being honest, this was quite the snooze fest. It basically, they just kind of showed off how liquid glass worked in tvOS, and then kind of did like a promo for some upcoming shows that they had. The only really notable features that they announced was this like profiles feature, which basically allows you to have different users, be able to sign in and kind of have like their own dashboards and whatever, which is basically the same functionality that's existed on other streaming services like Netflix and Prime, and basically any other one for years now. And I guess the other thing was they talked about this new like karaoke feature called Apple Music Sing. So yeah. But now we're getting back to the part where I mentioned the lore, the potential lore that Craig Federighi's F1 car got towed, because in this next segment, it was actually kind of interesting because it's Craig behind the wheel of this car, and you just hear these really loud epic music. You hear like this loud roar of an engine and gear shifts and everything, and you're like, oh, he's probably driving another cool car. And then they pan out and he's just driving this like dinky little like electric golf cart type thing. And then you see like this biker like coming like slowly up next to him, and then it like flashes back to him, and it's like all intense again. And then it kind of like pans back out, and the biker's passing him while he's driving this like electric golf cart thing. Kind of sad. And then, of course, in true Craig fashion, he gets out of the golf cart and then sprints inside, for the next part of the presentation, which is where we get into Mac OS. Now, the crack marketing team was definitely on it this year, but apparently they need to, I guess, tighten up their lips because Mark Gurman was right when he predicted leaked whatever you want to call what he does, the name for the Mac OS release this year, which is in fact Mac OS Tahoe. The one of the visually, in addition to the whole liquid glass thing, the menu bar is now fully transparent, so you basically only see the names of the icons. You don't kind of get that bar at the top anymore. Unless I guess you're using a MacBook with the notch in the top of it, and you still don't want to see that notch, so you use some other software tool to hide the notch. In which case, you're not really gonna notice any difference. But for the standard desktop, I guess, it is going to have a clear background there. The One of the other kind of cool features is you can now change the colors of folders as well as add custom icons and emojis to the folders. So there have been some icons on folders before already in macOS. So things like your home directory, the documents folder, downloads, music, videos, that kind of stuff. Those have already had kind of icons, but now you can basically add icons or emojis to basically any folder that you want to, which I think is probably a pretty nice way in order to kind of like quickly visually identify something. Potentially, I guess it depends on how you want to use it. If you're like me, you probably won't touch it anyway. But yeah, I could see it actually being quite useful for people that are very visual, and they can just like kind of quickly identify the emoji and know exactly what that's referring to, which could also make for some very interesting like design choices in terms of like what you correlate with what folder name. Could be quite interesting. There were some new continuity features that they talked about for coming to macOS, one of them being live activities. So now if you have live activities on your Mac setup, if you click on one of them, it'll basically open up the iPhone mirroring thing, and basically open up the app in your iPhone. The Mac now gets the phone app. Really not sure why. I had to scratch my head a while thinking about why on earth they would bring the phone app to the Mac, but because like it already has FaceTime, and you can make calls like FaceTime audio calls from your Mac. So I was trying to think like what would be the point of the phone app on the Mac, and the only thing I could really think of is I guess on the one hand it would be nice if you get an incoming phone call to be able to, and you're already at your computer, to just take it on your computer and not have to like step away from everything else you were doing, focusing on your phone and paying attention to that. You just have everything still on your computer there ready to go. I mean, so I guess it's like a minor convenience thing, I guess. But yeah, still was kind of scratching my head about like why they would do that. But like I said, I guess maybe a slight convenience thing. But probably one of the biggest updates to macOS was Spotlight. So Spotlight can now take actions. Of course, I'm assuming this is going to be highly restrictive to if you have an Apple Silicon Mac and and can tap into Apple Intelligence. Um, but you can do quick actions from Spotlight, things like creating events, audio recordings, and a bunch of other stuff. So that you can create like parameters for an action in Spotlight, and it'll automatically perform that action for you. So one example they gave, which I didn't really see much of a use in, but this was what they demoed, was basically sending an email. Because like I said, I'm not sure how that would be very useful. Because if you're able to write a quick action to tell Spotlight to send an email for you and it's that short, I'm not sure why you wouldn't just like send a text message to the person. But anyway, how it went was they were like, send an email followed by like a 10-word sentence to the, and then the recipient, and then with the, and then the subject, which, I mean, it works, but like, why would you I just don't see why a normal person would do that. Like, if you were literally gonna send an email to someone that was less than 10 words, Unless you don't have their phone number, I'm not sure why you wouldn't just text them that, but I don't know, maybe I'm just too young to understand that email is truly the king. Maybe, I don't know. But then there was another thing that you could do, which is basically anything in the menu bar at the top, like for every app, Spotlight would be able to actively be able to use. So if you like searched, one of the menu bar items in Spotlight for your active app, it would be able to access that. They also announced this other feature with Spotlight called Quick Keys, which the best way I can describe this is if you've used any kind of Unix type operating system and have used a either bash RC file, a zhrc file, or whatever, and configured like aliases to basically do like one or two letter, basically shorthands for commands. That's essentially what quick keys is. So rather than, typing out like a long drawn out string, you can basically just do like a two character combo, and it'll like basically assume that is the full string. So some common ones like in bash rc world, for instance, is if you do like gc, which could be basically be a shorthand for like git commit, for instance. So it's something like that where you basically do like a one or two character combination, probably at least two, and then it'll basically be remapped to an actual like longer drawn out actually action that it could take. So, kind of moving on from Spotlight, another update they brought up was Metal 4, which is a new version of Apple's graphics API. Um, One of the big bummers, actually, of macOS, which they didn't address in the keynote, but I actually figured out when I was watching some reviews and demos of the beta, is apparently Launchpad is dead. That's what it appears, at least, from some of the demos of the betas. Now, if you're not familiar with what Launchpad is if you're on a Mac and you're using a trackpad, if you do the four finger pinch thing, and that'll bring up kind of like all of your apps that you can kind of see in a night. It's kind of its own nice screen, and you can kind of like swipe through like the different pages of your apps. That's Launchpad. There's also a thing, I think it's by default in the dock, kind of like right next to where Finder is. I think that's typically where it is. At least that's where I have mine. It kind of has like the bunch of different, little squares and if you like hover over it, it says Launchpad, and it does the same thing. Apparently, that is being removed. And now, if you do, either click Launchpad or do the four finger pinch, it basically just brings up Spotlight's application menu rather than the Launchpad, which honestly makes me very sad because I like Launchpad. I use it a lot, and it's very nice. And I like being able to like arrange and order my apps how I want them. And I don't know. I mean, maybe you can do that in this Spotlight apps thing. I don't know. I mean, I guess I'll just have to start getting used to doing like command space and typing the name of the app that I want to launch, I guess, going forward, which definitely will be a bummer. But this isn't the first time that Apple has done something like this. Like, I don't remember which macOS version it was, but it was years ago at this point where they got rid of like, I think it was what they call it, was it Mission Control or something, where like you could swipe to like the left of your, I think it was to the left of your, well, I guess it depends on how you configured your trackpad. But if you swiped, so if you're at like the leftmost desktop and then you kind of swipe to go to a further left one, it would be like this kind of mission control thing, and you could have like a bunch of different widgets and everything. Like you could have a calendar and a calculator and the weather and a bunch of other things. And they got rid of that years ago. And now I guess they're getting rid of the Launchpad too. And of course, somewhere else in there a few years ago as well, they like completely redesigned the whole like system settings thing. So now it looks more like the iPhone and the iPad and everything. And I'll tell you what, I still can't find stuff in the new system settings. I liked how it was the old way. Like I know it from a visual design aspect, it didn't seamlessly fit with the rest of Apple's lineup in terms of like the iPad and the iPhone. But I don't know. To me, it was just a lot easier to find stuff then. Like now, I don't know where things are in all these submenus. Like in fairness, I'm getting a little bit better at it, but I still miss the old one. So yeah, it's gonna be a big bummer to see Launchpad go. But as far as support goes, The good news is Intel survives another year. So I guess anyone that is running Open Core Legacy Patcher theoretically will still be able to continue running the latest version of macOS on their unsupported Intel MacBooks or other Apple desktops. But the only Intel Macs that are still supported is the 2019 Mac Pro, as well as the 13-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros, also from 2019. Now, well, I guess the other one is the 2020 iMac as well. Those are the, I guess, four supported Macs that are Intel based. Of course, everything Apple Silicon based is still fully supported. Now, I don't remember the exact year offhand. I want to say my initial estimate was 2026 or 2027 for when Intel would be officially killed off, since my rationale was the Mac Pro typically gets a lot longer of a lifespan compared to other types of Macs as far as support goes, because of course the Mac Pro generally kind of steers more towards like enterprise workstation thing, and the refresh cycles for those are typically longer. They kind of stay in use longer. So from what I remember, I believe my estimate was like, kind of in that 2026, 2027 range. So I think I can't say for certain about the 2020 iMac or the 13 or 16 inch 2019 MacBook Pros, but I'm pretty sure the 2019 Mac Pro will probably be around next year at least. And then the following year in 2027, I think it's kind of a toss up, but I think after that, it's probably a goner. So, yeah, the days of Intel supported Mac OS definitely are numbered. And personally, I think probably we got maybe 2 years before it's gone the way of the dinos. Now, in fairness, typically Apple will, even after an operating system isn't the most current one, they'll at least still provide, security updates for at least, I want to say 1 or maybe 2 years. And then if there's something like super seriously wrong, like a couple months ago, there was like a massive 0 day or something that came out, and like they even were patching OSs back to Ventura, which at this point I think is like, was it 3 or 4 years outdated, something like that? Well, I guess 3 years old, since we're on 15 now. That was 13. So I guess you typically get security updates for an extra year once it's not the latest and greatest. And then I guess any potential year after that, it's like only if there's like some massive security vulnerability that otherwise like you couldn't go unpatched. But basically anything past that, like, yeah, you're on your own. So yeah, it will be interesting to see what next year's is, but that's the support for this year. Vision OS now gets widgets coming to it. One thing that was really cool about the widgets when they demoed it was how you can put them anywhere in your space and they'll basically stay there. So some of the demos they had was like putting a calendar on the wall or like a clock on the wall or something like that, or putting like a photo widget on the wall. So it's kind of one of those uh picture, like TV, like window things. I don't know how to describe it, but like it like seamlessly integrates so well into the wall that it kind of looks like you're looking through something, if that makes any sense. And that's kind of like how they demoed the picture one, which was super cool. So that, I think that'll be pretty cool. Again, that's not like a super useful feature, I guess, although I guess like the calendar and the clock one potentially could be, depending on where you put them in your space, I guess. um they also improved like the underlying algorithm behind how like spatial photos are done. So in theory, those should look a lot nicer. Personas are supposed to be more realistic now, at least in the demo that they showed off. And it'll also be a lot easier for multiple people with Vision Pros to be able to kind of share. Well, I guess it like they talked about it as like an enterprise feature, but they also mentioned as well, like if you wanted to have like a guest mode or something. But the point is, like, it'll be a lot easier to share a singular Vision Pro amongst multiple users, is kind of what they were getting at. They also mentioned some new spatial accessories, I guess being supported more than anything, that being the Logitech pencil thingy-majig. I don't even remember what they called it. And then the PlayStation VR 2 controllers are now also supported. They also mentioned the support of some like Adobe like editor or something for like editing spatial videos like on the Vision OS itself, which was kind of cool, I guess. So probably gonna have to pay a lot of money for that, knowing that it's Adobe. Web developers can also embed 3D objects into their web pages now. So if you have the Vision Pro on, you can essentially pull the object off of the web page and kind of view it in your space, which from the demo looked pretty cool. So I guess, yeah, that's cool, I guess. There is a new Jupyter environment. So if you didn't remember from the Vision Pro, like you could basically go in essentially a full VR mode where you'd like fully immerse yourself in like some environment. One of the coolest ones I think was the moon one, but now they're also bringing a Jupyter one, which looked pretty dang cool from the demo that they showed. I think support is probably not even worth me mentioning because there's only one device that exists that can run Vision OS, and of course it's still supported, that being the Vision Pro. And then we move into iPad OS, which, if we're being honest, I think was probably the most exciting OS release that they talked about, which is saying something because the past few years, the iPad OS version has been very snooze festy. Like it's like, yeah, everything we talked about the iPhone is coming. Or hey, remember that feature that didn't come to the iPad last year but came to the iPhone? Well, it's coming now. Woo! But no, the iPad actually got a serious update this year, and which is a new windowing system. So it's basically Mac OS at this point. I think that was kind of a rumor that was getting floated around, like it would be a lot more Mac OS like. And it is very akin to that in the sense that, unlike Stage Manager, where you could only have so many apps present at one time and you were a little restricted on where you could move them, now you have basically free reign to put as many apps as you want on the screen of the iPad, or I guess external display if you're using one, and resize to your heart's content, move them around, and it looks really cool. You can also kind of flick windows to edges to kind of like snap them. And yeah, it's finally getting a usable multitasking setup, at least if you ask me. Now, granted, I haven't really used an iPad, at least a, a modern iPad running a modern version of iPad OS, but from demos and kind of use cases I've seen, it always seemed very limited, especially with the chips that these newer iPads are coming with, right? Like the modern iPads, like the iPad Pros and the iPad Airs, they're shipping with M series chips, like the chips that Apple is putting in their desktop computers, and they're running iPad OS. But now with this whole windowing, multitasking setup, I think we're going to really start to see people flexing and taking more full advantage of the actual horsepower of the iPads, which I think is going to be fantastic. And it really does kind of look like like Mac OS, to be honest, because you have the dock still at the bottom, but then you have all these windows kind of floating around. So to put the cherry on top, apps now have a menu bar. So it's really kind of morphing into kind of this, Mac OS like kind of thing. And I think a lot of people, myself included, are saying, well, it's about dang time because people have been asking for a major improvement to how iPadOS can handle kind of like power users and multitasking for years now. Pretty much ever since they kind of switched over to the new iPad design language with like the whole iPad Pro 11-inch iPad, which, gosh, when did that come out? Like before Apple Silicon came out on the Mac, so like, I don't know, what was that, 6 years ago? Maybe seven? I don't remember. I think it was 2018, I think, was the year that iPad came out. Anyway, people have basically been saying since that iPad came out that iPad already does more than what they are basically capable of doing with iPad OS, and it's that old. So people have been asking about this for a while, but in pure Craig fashion, he of course found a way to humor us all, because Craig, in the various humorous way that he is, after the windowing demo was done, he said this, quote, "Wow, more windows, a pointier pointer, a menu bar? Who would have thought? We truly pulled off a mind-blowing release." Ladies and gentlemen, this is why we love this man, because right here at the Air Force One Craig Federighi Fan Club podcast. Oh wait, excuse me, hold on, wrong podcast. Sorry, this is the Dark Assassins Inc. or the Dark Assassins podcast, right? I'm getting all kerfuffled here with Craig Federighi and his legendary antics. But yeah, I mean, it's not the first time that he's done this, because when they brought the calculator to the iPad, like, he made a very similar remark, which was absolutely hilarious. And I think he did the same thing maybe with the weather app too when they brought it. It's so funny because, people have been asking about this and wondering, when is this coming? When is this coming? Been asking for it for years. And then Apple demos it like it's like this huge thing that no one's ever thought of it before. And then everyone's probably rolling their eyes like, yes, we've been asking about this for years. And then Craig just come in there nonchalantly and with so much sarcasm, it's palpable, basically gives everyone what they were expecting and be like, yeah, you all wanted this, and guess what? It's finally here now. Who would have thought? So definitely very cool. But yeah, the other thing that was really cool about this whole new windowing system is every iPad that is capable of running iPadOS 26 is able to run this windowing system.
A surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one.
Which, I don't know about you, but that surprised the heck out of me, because I thought for sure when they were demoing this, they were going to like artificially limit it to only iPads running like maybe M series chips or something. But I'm not entirely sure how it's going to look on the Mac Mini, or not the Mac Mini, the iPad Mini, because the iPad Mini also supports this, but of course the iPad Mini has a very small screen compared to, of course, the larger iPads. So I'm not entirely sure how useful it will be on there. I guess maybe you'll have to bust out your reading glasses or something. But if you connect your iPad to an external monitor, man, you could have a field day in terms of like productivity, and basically you have a Mac right there at that point. So definitely a huge update to the iPad, but we're not even done yet. Because now in the Files app, you can actually select which application you want the file to open in. So of course, this has been a feature on macOS for years now. It's been there for a long time, but now you can get that functionality on the iPad. The Preview app from the Mac is now also coming to the iPad as well. And the iPad now also has an added audio input selector and better voice isolation in every single app. Not entirely sure if this is an iPad specific thing. It kind of seems like it could be coming to, say, like the iPhone 2, but they just chose to talk about it in iPad OS. They also claimed, quote, studio quality vocals with AirPods. I'm not sure about that one. I think that might be a little bit of a stretch. But I guess we'll see when that actually comes. Um, they also announced a local capture thing, which I can't. I don't think this is an exclusive iPad thing. Like, I have to think it isn't an exclusive iPad feature, but essentially what it is it allows you to essentially record things like, FaceTime calls, or like other, video conferencing calls from like your perspective. But like at the same time, like basically every video conferencing app has that kind of feature built into it. So I'm not entirely sure. I think that was mostly geared towards like FaceTime and stuff, but uh, okay. Anyway, so now you can also run tasks in the background on the iPad, which again kind of gives more of that like power user capability. So if you're doing something like a video export, for instance, and you say you have your video editing software on your iPad, you can basically run an export and go do other things, and the export will basically continue working in the background, which is obviously something you've been able to do on the Mac or basically any desktop operating system for basically ever. But it is cool that now that's coming to the iPad as well. And this is basically adding kind of more credence to the fact that iPads, I think it seems like Apple's now actually taking the iPad seriously. Like the software is finally starting to catch up to the hardware that they're putting in these things. So that is something that is very cool to see. And the other thing, I guess, real quick on the whole background tasks thing is they'll show up as a live activity. So basically, like if you kick off that video export, like I was saying, like you'll see like kind of like the live activity indicator of like kind of what the progress is. And of course, there is a whole new API that Apple created for this. So developers will be able to implement this in their own apps, so their apps can take advantage of this background processing going on. Another thing that they touched on real briefly at the end was a 3D graphing mode in the Math Notes thing, which since Math Notes is across basically all Apple Intelligence devices, I think that that's probably going to be coming across the board, not just iPad specifically. But yeah, this like I said when we started talking about iPad OS, I think this is probably, at least for me, probably the highlight of the WWDC keynote. Of course, aside from the opening scene and, of course, Craig's other antics. But as far as the OS is concerned, I think iPad OS is probably the most impressive, which is kind of funny because I don't actually use it. It's like the one, well, I guess I don't use an Apple Watch either, but it's like the one like Apple product that I don't use, yet I was the most impressed by during the keynote. And Craig said on the subject, which, great minds think alike, of course, he said, quote, "This is the biggest iPad OS release ever." And he's definitely not wrong, kind of as we alluded to. And I think, like I also said, I think the iPad is now finally going to start to be able to take advantage of the M series chips they've been putting in these iPads for years at this point. So it'll be interested to see what people can actually do with the iPad, and I think we're kind of getting to the point now, like people have done challenges over the past few years of, can an iPad really replace your MacBook or whatever. And I think now with like the whole multitasking thing, the new multitasking features, like a true windowing system, the fact that you can run tasks in the background, I think the case for, can an iPad replace your MacBook, is gonna be a lot stronger this year than it has ever been before. And I think for a lot of people, you could seriously make the case that you could replace an iPad with your MacBook and be perfectly fine. Now, I know people out there that have been using an iPad as their main computing device for years now, like long before iPad OS was really even a thing, or even before it got any sort of like multitasking features. But yeah, definitely now more than ever, with especially with the whole windowing thing. I think the argument is definitely going to be there. Now, in terms of support, since we mentioned this new windowing multitasking thing is coming to any iPad that supports iPad OS 26. All of the 11 and 13-inch iPad Pros are supported. The iPad third generation, or iPad Air third generation and later, are supported. The iPad Mini 5th generation and later are supported, and the iPad 8th generation and later are supported. So, yeah, that is a roundabout world of WWDC. I definitely enjoyed watching it. Like I said, there were some OS releases that were kind of very mediocre, I guess. But then, of course, you had other ones like iPad OS that I was actually very, very impressed by. So I'm definitely interested to see, if you listened or watched the keynote, what your thoughts were. If you're on YouTube, you can leave a comment down below. Or you can always shoot me an email at contact@darkassassins.inc.com. But before we go, we should get back to see if you were actually paying attention. So at the beginning of this episode, we talked about that outstanding intro scene that was absolute cinema, with Craig Federighi driving the F1 race car. And I asked you 4 questions to see if you were paying attention. The first one was, in the opening scene of WWDC, Craig mentioned he needed to save his what? If you said he needed to save his tires, congratulations, you got that one correct and you were paying attention. The funny thing about that too was he was driving and he makes, says the line like, I need to save my tires. And then Tim's like, what for? And he's like, I don't know. That's just what they say, which absolute gold. Then the next question, what number was Craig's F1 car? If you said 16, you are unfortunately incorrect. It was 9. So if you said 9, congratulations, you got it correct. And what brand was Craig's F1 car? So what was the name, what was the manufacturer on the front of it? If you said Mercedes, congratulations, you also got that one correct. I'd be interested to know if anyone's 3 for 3 so far. And then the final one is Tim said, according to Tim Cook, what turn was Craig losing time on? If you said turn 6, congratulations, you got that one correct as well. And that one had a good retort back from Craig as well, because Tim was like, you're losing time on turn 6, Craig. And he's like, they're kind of all turns, Tim. Because, of course, it's Apple Park and it's, just one gigantic big circle. So I guess on the one hand, people like to give NASCAR drivers, flack for just going in circles and, only making left-hand turns. But at least in NASCAR, there are some straightaways. Whereas if you're driving the loop at Apple Park, you're literally always turning. There are no straight sections. So maybe, I don't know, F1 folks, maybe NASCAR is a little more impressive than your I'm not even going to go there, because F1 always makes both right and left turns. And yeah, but again, that scene was absolutely incredible. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you enjoyed WWDC, hopefully you enjoyed that as well. And that's going to do it for me in this episode of the Dark Assassins podcast. Also, if you haven't already, definitely be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more outstanding episodes, and share it around if you haven't already. And if you have any questions about this episode, have any feedback about what you thought of WWDC, if you're on YouTube, leave it in the comments down below, or you can always shoot me an email if you're on podcast at contact@darkassassinsinc.com. And that's going to do it for me in this episode of the Dark Assassins podcast. Until next time, my fellow assassins, remember, bull nothing equals true. If action not equal to null, return true. I'll see you next time on the Dark Assassins podcast.